Hello, I'm Alex with Digital Tutors. In this series of tutorials, we'll talk about some of the different ways that you can create and utilize shapes in After Effects. We'll start by going over the basics of using the shape tools to make shape layers and the difference between parametric and Bezier paths. We'll explore the control we have over polygons and stars that can create an endless possibility of intricate shapes. We'll talk about using the Add menu to create new shapes or add shape attributes to our shape layers. Next, we'll import vector artwork from Illustrator and convert to shapes so that we can utilize the repeater. We'll tell a story with shape morphing and learn the importance of defining the first vertex. We'll also get an understanding of the importance of stacking order within our shape layer. Finally, we'll combine shape attributes to create a particle-like effect that is mainly being driven by changing the properties of a stroke. So let's go ahead and get started with shape fundamentals. In this lesson, we'll be going over the basic fundamentals of shape layers in After Effects. We have a new project open, but we don't have a composition. So let's go to Composition and New Composition. And we're going to just use 1280 by 720. And let's pick a color that we are just good with looking at for a little while. So we'll use this nice royal blue and hit OK. Now, shape layers are very cool and very dynamic, and you can do a lot with them, but they're probably overlooked a little bit. And probably the most common way to create a shape layer is just by grabbing your shape tool and dragging a shape across. And so we're going to grab our rectangle, and we're going to go over just some of the different ways that we can create shapes. And so if we look at the different values up here for the fill and stroke, we can come in and we can change the fill color, but we can also change what kind of fill we have before we even draw our shape. We have a linear gradient, a solid, and a radial gradient. We can also choose a different blending mode, and we can change even the opacity before we make our shape. And then we have the stroke, and we have the same ability to make a linear or a radial gradient, and or just a regular solid. Or we can change the color of our fill. So we can even come through and choose some of these gross colors down here, or just choose white. And then we can choose the actual stroke that we're going to have. So we'll make ours 14 or 15. And so we have Bezier path selected. And I'm going to show you what that means. So we'll make our shape. Then we're going to deselect Bezier path. And we'll make another shape right next to it. Now let's look down in our shape layer. We have the rectangle 2, that is the second one we made, and we have rectangle 1. If I get my pen tool and I hover above these shapes, I can actually add points to this rectangle over here. And I cannot add points to this other shape. However, if I open up my rectangle 2 path, my rectangle path, then I have this roundness option. So I can actually make this rounded rectangle from my tools over here, and from the same way that I made my rectangle. So if I went and selected my rounded rectangle, and make sure I don't have Bezier path selected, and I added a rounded rectangle over here next to it, I can open up that path and open up that rectangle path, and I can change the roundness just the same. So it's almost like a redundancy, really, to have a rectangle, a rounded rectangle, and then these other shapes. And so I'll explain why the polygon and the star are redundant here in just a minute. Now, I cannot, like I said, I cannot change these shapes for now, but if I have my pen tool, I can change this other shape over here, this Bezier path. So if I was happy with a shape, but now I wanted to change it, so that would be the rectangle 2. I can select that path and I can right click, and then I can convert it to a Bezier path. So that is one way that we can, once we're happy with the shape, then we can go in and make it editable so that we can take our pen tool and change it up or add points if we wanted to. Very cool. So one thing I want to point out though is that all of these these shapes that we've added to this shape layer, they're all nice and packaged up to where it has this group. And so I can actually hit enter and I can call this whatever I want. And we look inside and it has the path, the stroke, and the fill. If I were to use this little button right here and add a shape to the shape layer, then it creates it in a different way. So this time I'm going to add a polystar. And since I actually had the rectangle selected, then it put the polystar inside that group. So now it's kind of taken on whatever values are inside this group. And if I took it and pulled it outside, then now it placed this independently from this group. And so now it's not really on its own layer, but it's on its own. It's independent of these other shapes inside. But if I wanted to give this a fill and a stroke, then I could do that. I can click add, and I'm going to give it a fill. And you can see that it put this fill kind of down here at the bottom. And then I can also give it a stroke. And the stroke, let's change the color to something different. Let's change it to a dark blue. And let's give our stroke a little bit more width. So what I want you to see though is that our layer, it still has a stacking order inside this shape layer. So if I took my stroke and I put it down below one of these other shapes, then now that stroke is affecting the whatever I want, the whatever I want rectangle. And if I bring it down one more, then now it's affecting the stroke 1 or the rectangle 2, excuse me. And if I drag it down even further, then it's going to affect all of them. So we still have a stacking order. Now, what if I wanted to make the polystar have its own group? Well, that's easy. I can just go and click and create an empty group. And I'm going to call this the star shape group. And now we can click the path, the stroke, and the fill, and we're going to put them inside. Now, what do you think is going to happen when I drop them inside now that we know about stacking order? Well, surprise. Since they're inside this group, then now they won't affect these other shapes. It's almost like a pre-comp, like a nested comp, how if whatever values are inside aren't going to affect anything that's outside of that composition. So let's take a look at our polystar path and let's open that up. And we have some different values that are a little different than the rectangle tool. Now we can change the radius here. So we have an outer and an inner radius, and I'm going to click that and just increase that a little bit. And I'm actually going to, let's take our shape and bring it up to the top so that it's in front of these other shapes. There we go. Now we also have roundness. So if I took my inner roundness and I changed it, then I can get a different type of shape. And if I just keep pulling on that, then you can see I'm getting something a little bit different than what would have been maybe have expected out of a star. And I also have an outer roundness. So when I click the outer roundness, then I'm able to again get some really cool looking shapes. So what will happen now if I were to, let's say, change my points? So when I click and start changing those points, then I'm able to get a really cool like kaleidoscope type of effect. And if you notice, we also have the ability to change this from a star to a polygon. So that is kind of similar to the rounded rectangle. We are able to change that up just a little bit and turn it into a completely different shape. So let's change our roundness now back to 0, and so that was, now that we only have the outer roundness, let's change our points. Let's change them up just a little bit. And so we're able to go right into a nice hexagon just by changing up some of our values. And so these are all keyframeable, and there's a lot of potential there. And so now that we know the basics of our layer shapes, our shape layers, in our next lesson, we're going to be telling a story with our shapes. In this lesson, we're going to be telling a story with shapes in After Effects. So let's get started by creating a new composition. So we'll go to New Composition, and 1280 by 720 is going to work great for us, and 24 frames a second, and we'll do 10 seconds for our duration. And for the background color, let's just pick black for now. We might change it up later. We'll just have to see what we feel like. And so let's just hit OK. All right, let's get started by kind of figuring out what our story is going to be about. So, something that's probably always going to be out there is a story about the environment, and a story about inflation or about the economy. And so, we'll just maybe stick with how about the economy. And so, if it is about the economy, then it's probably going to be we're going to have like something about the price of gas and the price of food and government. And so we'll have some nice objects that we can kind of morph into. And so we'll start with a gas pump, and then this will be a nice little shape to start out with. And so let's make a new shape layer, and we'll go ahead and name that. We'll call it a gas pump. How about let's just use the gas handle. How about that? And let's get let's get our rectangle tool, and we'll start by creating that tube shape. And so a gas handle has like a tube that kind of comes out of the pump, and then it comes down, and it really goes through even the handle, and then it just comes out in a nice curve. So we can just start with a nice rectangle, and our fill will be white. We don't want to stroke around it. And let's make sure that it stays a Bezier path, because we're going to come back in with our pen tool and we're going to adjust this shape after we draw it. So let's see here. Maybe we should start, let's just make it vertical, and let's make it about that wide. Then we'll add some vertices to our shape. And let's see, we'll probably have one here, then maybe some here. And then if you hold Control with your pen tool, you can click and drag, and that will allow you to select. And we'll just add some curve to, or some see, I did not hold Select or Control that time, and I meant to. Actually, I want these two. We'll just click and move those. There we go. And then I'm going to hold Alt, and when I click and drag, then I'm changing that from a corner to a curved or a smooth vertex. And then I'm going to just click these and just kind of expand them out a little bit to where it's nice and straight at the end instead of skewed. And if it helps you to turn off the preview for a while, you can do that. Let's see here, maybe we need to move this one up just a little. There we go, a nice curve. And so some of this will be covered up by our handle, and that's fine. All right, so now let's add to our pump, or to our handle. So it's like metal, and then it's covered with like plastic, and so we're gonna start making that plastic shape. And it seems like the back has kind of like a hump back here. Comes out, comes back in, and then it kind of just turns into a nice little handle. And then it comes back around again, and we go back up. And then we have this other weird thing. It seems like a gas pump has this other part that, like a hump or something, that kind of pops out. And so this is like where the handle pops out. So maybe I should add another vertex right here and just kind of pull that in. There we go. I think that looks about right. I mean, it doesn't have to be exact, because all gas pumps are a little different, right? And so this could be maybe a manufacturer that no one's ever seen before. But it's still, I mean, when you look at this, you can still think that it's a gas pump, but maybe we need to make this just a little bit wider. There we go. And longer. There it is. Okay. And then we need to make the little handle part. And so we'll start in here, and we're just going to just come down and just clicking and dragging. See, I want to actually finish out, or there we go. And then what I'm going to do is, in order to show you another feature, I'm going to just make a path like this. And I'm going to click this. So this shape right here, this last shape, we'll call this our handle. I want to duplicate that path. And so I'm going to actually just hit Control D. And then I'm going to add something to this little group. So this group has a stroke and fill inside it, but there's something else that I can add that will make these different. And so I'm going to add something that is called merge paths. And so you might have heard this if you ever worked in Illustrator. And what we're going to do is we're going to tell these paths to merge in a certain way. And we want one of them to subtract from the other. So I need to move this up so you can see here. So I'm going to tell it to subtract. So now it looked like that the paths went away, but they actually didn't. So what happened is that we have one path on top of the other. And so I want path 2 to actually be a little bit smaller. So I'm going to just double click on one of these vertices and just click and drag. So now you can see that we are actually subtracting from each other. Awesome, right? And then when we're finished, we can actually hit enter on our keyboard. And so that is almost like a little filter that we've added, this little subtract. And so it's a little different than like if you're using masks or something like that, because then you just have, it's like this little drop down. But if now we can add it, and we can add it just to the parts of our drawing that we want to. So if I wanted to add, then these two shapes would add to each other. Or if we wanted them to intersect, and then wherever they intersect, then that is where we can see the fill. But let's just keep that on subtract, and I think that looks great. So now we have our gas pump handle, and so in our next lesson we'll be moving on to creating a car. In this lesson, we're going to continue telling our story by creating shapes in After Effects. So in our previous lesson, we were able to create this nice gas pump here, and so we took a rectangle and added some vertices to it and curved it around and added to these shapes. The whole time we were able to keep it down into one shape layer. So we're going to continue this, our story here. We're going to go ahead and we're going to create a car. And so, you know, the gas, we're going to be telling the story of the gas is expensive, and then our transportation. And so let's go ahead and let's make a new shape layer. And let's go ahead and name this car. Simple enough, right? And let's create some wheels for our car. And so we can just select the ellipse tool, and let's just make a wheel down here somewhere. And so just click and drag. Make sure you hold shift so that you are able to constrain those proportions and have a nice round wheel. And then we want to duplicate this wheel, but we want to make sure that we keep it in this shape layer. So if we just hit Control D right now, then it'd actually make a new layer. So if we double click on this ellipse, we can either hold Alt and drag, or we can hit Control D and drag. Either way you want to do it. Just make sure that when you hold Alt, when you see these double arrows, that lets you know that when you start to drag, that you're going to create a duplicate. And so if you hold Shift, then you're able to move it along a straight line. So we're able to click and drag and make a duplicate of that wheel. Awesome. Now let's make the body of the wheel. So I'm going to grab my pen tool, and if you make a shape, or the body of the car, you know that the wheel well comes down to about half of the tire. And so that's what we'll start down here. And so I'm just going to click and drag, and we're going to be making our wheel well. And I put these wheels kind of close together, so I guess this is a two-seater. And so we'll go ahead and finish this out here, the back of the car. And then we have the back glass, which we'll come back and fix anything that doesn't look quite right. Then we have the front of the car. There we go. So let's go ahead and we're going to fix a couple things here. So I'm going to select this back glass, or where the back glass meets the rear of the car, and I'm going to hold Alt, and I'm going to click on that Bezier handle, and that will allow me to actually change this Bezier handle's position independent from the other handle, which is actually pretty cool. And then maybe I want to add just a little bit of a curve to that back. And then if this is a sports car, let's go ahead and bring up the back end a little bit, make it kind of sporty. And then let's see, maybe I should let's see, I'll go ahead and pull open the hood a little bit. There's barely enough room for an engine, but this is, we're just being symbolic of a car really, more than drawing a real car. That looks nice and sporty. So now we have our car. Maybe I'll open up these wheel wells so there's a little bit of room. There we go. All right. So there is our car. So now that we have a car, we're going to move on to another part of our story, and that is the government. And so a good symbol for the government is to draw like the Capitol. And so we'll just draw like the front steps, or just the front pillars, let's say, of the Capitol. So we'll go ahead and close the car up, and we'll go to Layer, New, and we're going to make a new shape layer. And let's go ahead and name that while we're at it. We're going to name it the Capitol. Awesome. All right, now a good symbolism of the Capitol is pillars. And so we'll get the rectangle tool. And let's see here. Here's one pillar. Make sure we have enough room for the top. I'm just going to go ahead and double click on this pillar. I'm just going to make some duplicates of this pillar. There we go. And then how about, let's see, let's make a rectangle. Let's make a rectangle for the top of the Capitol building. And then we want to get our Bezier. So when I made this rectangle, I was sure to make sure that Bezier path was selected. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to come back here and add points to it. So just remember to do that. So that actually already looks like either like Roman architecture, or at least like the Capitol for the United States. So we'll leave it at that. And I think that those look great. So we might just kind of nudge this down a little bit. Awesome. Okay, that looks good. So now that we have our Capitol building and we have our car, in our next lesson, we're going to finish telling our story, and we're going to make a cell phone, and we're going to make a fork. So see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to continue telling our story by making a cell phone and a fork for our story. So in our last lesson, we were able to make the Capitol building, and we made this awesome car, super fast, watch out. So now let's go ahead and we'll make a new shape layer, and we're going to call this one our fork. And so you can just hit enter with that layer selected, and we'll put in fork. And let's go ahead and we can actually make it kind of like our pillars, or for our Capitol. So but we'll make these sideways. And so let's go ahead and click and drag. We'll be making the fork prongs. And so you can double click and just make a duplicate. So maybe come down over here, and then I'm going to make another one, and let's make another one. So I think those are long enough. Maybe I need to, oops, didn't mean to do that. I just meant to extend them just a little. Okay, I think that's about the length that we need. Now let's get our pen tool. And let's see, I want to make the shape for the bottom of the fork. So I'm going to come in, let's see, about right here, and come over here, maybe about like this. So let's see, maybe about right here. Just finish that out. So it probably would have been best to, I could have made like a half circle and probably cut it up. It's okay. If you want to redo this part, you could actually make a circle and then like chop it in half. Just, whatever you need to make this shape. There we go. Just make a few adjustments. And then, you know what, let's add a couple of points because we need to have a handle for our fork. So a couple of points, and I'm going to just click and just pull this part out. So you can actually just pull it out of your scene if you need to. There we go. So when I deselect, I want to make sure that I got all this lined up. So I'm going to zoom in. You can just use, if you have a scroll on your mouse, when you do that, then you're actually zooming in. And so let's see here. I'm going to grab that shape and pull it down. Just kind of line that up. I think that looks good. Looks great. Awesome. It's a good looking fork. Good looking fork. Kind of looks like I could nudge that up a little. Man, best looking fork I've ever seen. Okay, so now that we are finished looking at how awesome this fork is, let's go ahead and turn this off. And now we're going to make a phone. And I don't want to make a specific phone. I want to make just something that kind of represents a smartphone, because that's probably what people can associate with, that I identify with, I should say. Let's go and make our new shape layer, and layer, new shape layer. And let's go ahead and call it our smartphone. Why not? Smartphone. And we're going to start with just a rectangle. But actually, you know what? Let's make this just a regular rectangle for now. We can change this back to a Bezier path later on when we start to merge these. So let's see, maybe nudge this over a little. And why I want this a Bezier, just a regular rectangle path, is because I want to be able to open it up. And a smartphone is not just a perfect rectangle. I want to be able to adjust the roundness. And so let's see, I'm going to give it just a little bit of roundness. I think that looks awesome. Okay, now I want to have a screen and I want to have some buttons, but this is white. This is symbolize, or this is just symbolic of a phone, and we're not going to really make a screen because that's not what we're doing. This isn't the style that we're going with. So what we're going to do is we're going to make another rectangle inside this one. And let's see, that's probably enough room for that. And maybe we should give that rectangle just a little bit of a rounded, just round out those corners as well. So we'll go to our roundness and just give it a little bit here. Awesome. So remember when we were able to take those two paths and we're able to kind of make them chop away from each other? Well, that's kind of what I want to do here. So I'm going to add a merge paths, and I want the merge paths to be subtract. So what I need to do though is I want to make sure that I have the two rectangles. They need to be able to interact with each other. So what I can do, I'm going to take my merge paths, I'm going to bring them down here below both of my rectangles, and I'm going to actually, you know what, let's use, instead of making a new group, let's actually just use this rectangle. And we're going to hit enter, and we're going to call it our phone. And so this already has a path inside of it, and this will be our screen, right? Is that our screen? Yes. So we'll go ahead and name these so we can keep them all straight. And then let's get our other rectangle, and this one is our body. Let's put this inside. I'm gonna let go. I didn't know where I dropped it. Okay, let's put it inside our other here. So depending on where we put this, then we need to make sure that these are merging correctly. So if we go and get our merge paths and then we put this inside our group, then it all kind of works together. So and remember that stacking order is very important because we want to have our body, we want to have the screen take away from the body, then we want to have the merge paths tell all those things what to do. So even if you drop it down below the fill, it's still going to get all jacked up. So I'm going to go ahead and, we don't need that stroke, and we actually don't even need this other container. We can delete all that business. And then what we need though is let's go ahead and take our screen and let's move it up a little. And then we want to have some little buttons down here. So we'll get our rectangle tool, but let's make sure that we have let's have our phone selected. That is not, I meant to grab an ellipse, so let's delete that one. Actually go inside here and get our ellipse. There we go. And so I'm going to make a couple of circles here. We can adjust those. And so what I want though is I want to grab these, I want to put them inside my phone. Boop, there we go. And let's go ahead and nudge these over. Put these a little over here. So what's interesting though is you saw the position that, so there was the position was a little different when we dropped it inside our phone, if you noticed that. And so just something kind of interesting to watch out for. Since we had nudged the phone, it didn't take that into account. So when we dropped it inside, then, you know, it kind of moved along with it. So just kind of an interesting little thing. Now let's take this one and move it over, move it down. And then it's to get our larger button. Move it down and move it over. Awesome. So there is our phone, and I'm going to go ahead and grab this anchor point. Kind of bothers me actually. The whole thing is kind of off. There we go. So there's our phone. So now we have made our fork and our phone, and we also made gas pump, and we made a car, we made Capitol building. So we have made all these awesome things to tell our story. And so in our next lesson, we're going to start morphing all these awesome things together to tell our story. In this lesson, we're going to be animating our story. So in our last lesson, we're able to make all of these objects with our shapes. And so we have our cell phone. That was the last one that we made. So now let's go back and we're going to start creating our animations. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and set up our timeline so that we will be able to easily see where each transition should take place. And so we have 5 different objects that we're going to be using. And what we'll do is we're just going to add some markers on our timeline. So you can just hit an asterisk if you don't have anything selected. If you do have a layer selected, it's going to put a marker like right there. And so if I hit the asterisk on my numeric keyboard or keypad, then it's going to put that on that layer. So what I'm going to do instead is have no layer selected. And let's see, we have 10 seconds in our timeline, and we have 5 objects. So what I'm going to do is, so I want this gas handle that will be the first object here, and that will be in our scene for about 1.5 seconds before the transition takes place. So I'm going to go ahead and hit asterisk, and then I'm going to come down to 2 seconds, and that's when the animation will be finished. And then I'm going to come down to, I'm going to allow the next one to be on here for about 1.5 seconds. And again, at the 4-second mark. So I'm just going to go all the way through here, adding these markers. That way that whenever I'm trying to line up my keyframes, and I can easily, you know, see where those are. And if you happen to be off a frame or two, don't worry about it. You know, you just want to get this all laid out. Okay, so this last image will actually be on for about 2 seconds instead of 1.5 seconds. I believe that's okay. I think that'll be okay for our animation. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with our gas handle, but we need to create a a layer that will be able to hold all of our shapes. And so, we made all these on separate shape layers so that we can copy their attributes and paste them into just one continuous layer up here above the rest. So let's go to Layer, New, Shape Layer, and we'll call this our Animations. And we're going to go to our gas handle. We can go and turn on that layer and make it visible. And let's take a look at what we have. If you don't remember, we had a handle, and we had the shape that was like this larger bulky shape, and then we had this rectangle that we used to create the curved tube. So maybe we'll start with the handle first. So we can just select the handle group, and we're going to Control C. But we can go ahead and turn that off, and we'll go up to our animations, open that up, and we have a contents folder. And let's go ahead and bring our indicator back to the beginning of our timeline, and we're going to paste. And so now inside of our contents we have the handle. Now let's go ahead and, I guess we can go ahead and grab the rest. We didn't have to just grab the handle. So we can grab the shape one and the rectangle, and we'll copy. And let's come up to our contents folder. We'll go ahead and paste those in there. Now we can go ahead and turn off our gas handle, which I guess we didn't even have it on in the first place. We're still able to copy those items out of there. That's pretty awesome. All right, now let's think about what we are going to do here. So the gas handle is going to turn into our car. So with our gas handle, we have this one compound shape that is making up the handle. We have this bulky shape, and we have this tube. So perhaps this handle will turn into this wheel, and maybe this tube will turn into this wheel, and then this bulky shape will turn into the body of the car. And so what we'll need to do is we're going to take our tire from our car, and so that will be let's see, which one is the first ellipse? That is this ellipse right here. And so we can go ahead and grab that path, and we're going to open it up and make sure that you actually go inside that path and you see the keyframeable path that is inside that folder, and we're going to copy. Then we'll come up to our animations and open up the contents and open up that handle, and you have two paths. You have an inner path and an outer path. We're going to open up the outer path, and remember, we're going to come up to where this indicator is, or this marker, and when you hold shift, then your timeline indicator will just kind of lock in under that time marker. So that is very, very handy. And let's add a keyframe for that, and then we'll come down, and we might stagger the animations between these markers here so that they don't all happen at the exact same time, but we can always adjust if we are not happy with what those look like. So let's go ahead and we're going to paste. And so when we do that, then you can see this outer ring, or this outer shape, turns into that wheel. But what about that inner shape? What should we do there? Well, what we can do is we'll just drag this inner shape off of our composition, just so that it's not interfering with any other shapes that happen to wander by. So we'll go ahead and we'll also add a keyframe for that path, and we can go ahead and put it, start that in the beginning of our animation. And then around that same time, we'll just click that path, and so we can get our pen tool and just double click on one of these vertices, and then we'll just drag this off of our comp here. All right, so now we have that handle turning into a wheel, and now let's focus on this tube. So now let's go and get our other ellipse. That was ellipse 2, and open up that path, and we're going to copy, and we'll come up to our pump handle and grab, let's see, we'll go ahead and grab that rectangle that we used as the tube, and we're going to select that path, and we'll add a keyframe for that first part of our animation, and then we're going to Control V, and that will paste that shape. So what's happening is as when we paste it, then we're telling it that this shape needs to be keyframed. And so luckily we don't have anything crazy going on. You know, sometimes you might need to come in and change where the first vertex where it is in this shape. But so far everything looks pretty good. We'll just go ahead and keyframe this last part, this last bulky part. And if any crazy things happen, then we'll adjust those. And if not, we'll just move on to the next lesson and animate our next object. So let's go ahead and grab this large part of our car. And so that is, I believe, shape 1. So let's get that path. We're going to copy. Let's come up to our handle and open that up. And it looks like we have, let's see, actually no, it's not the handle. What do we have? Okay, shape 1. We have this path, and we'll add a keyframe to the beginning. And then at the very, very end, we'll go ahead and add that shape. So it looks like that really morphed really well. Let's see here, what we're going to do to kind of make this look a little bit better. So let's go ahead and we'll hit U on the keyboard, and that will pull up all the keyframes that we've made. And so what we'll do is we're going to grab all these and kind of line them up, or just the handle that is turning into the wheels. And we're going to come down to that second marker, and we're going to add keyframes for those other items. Actually, we don't need one for that one. Actually, I don't remember which one that was. So we'll just add keyframes for all of those. But what we're going to do is we're going to go back to those keyframes, and we're going to put these tires. I'm just going to double click. I'm going to have them kind of like bounce up. So whenever they animate in, they'll kind of drop down and bounce back up to the car, just to give it a little bit of variety here. I think that looks great. All right, so our car looks good, and we're going to have that transform into our next item. So just go ahead and stick around, and we'll be turning this car into something else. In this lesson, we'll continue telling our story by animating our shapes. So in our previous lesson, we were able to create this really cool animation, and we have our wheels kind of bouncing off the bottom of our composition. And now we're going to have our car turn into our Capitol building. So the thing that we can do is we can open up our Capitol, and let's take a look at what we have. We have these 4 pillars, and we have the top of our Capitol. And if we remember right, the first rectangle that we drew was this one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 was the top. And I think the best way to go about this would be to go ahead and animate the body of the car turning to maybe this larger shape. To me, it makes more sense. So and then we'll worry about these 2 pillars and how do we make one tire turn into 2 pillars. We'll worry about that here shortly. Let's open up the rectangle 5, and that is that path, and we'll grab that path, and I'm going to copy, and let's go and open up our animations, and we're going to find the path for the body of the car, and that will be, there's tire, that is shape 1. Here we go. And let's go ahead and rename this to the larger shape and open that up. And here is that path. And let's add a keyframe and come down just a little bit and paste that shape. There it is. Awesome. And if we back up, we can take a look at that animation. And it looks pretty wonky. So there are some things that we can do to fix that. If you look, before it starts, the car has the first vertex set to right here above the windshield. Now what that means is that this is where, if we were to have drawn this, then this is where we started. And even if we didn't draw this shape, by default it will have a first vertex, meaning it is where the line starts and ends. So if we come over to this rectangle slash roof that we made, then this is the first vertex. So it looks like it's a long distance from this one, from this first vertex over to this first vertex. So what we can do is define what the first vertex is for this roof. Let's grab our pen tool, and we'll just hold control, and we're just going to select, drag and select, just to grab that first vertex, and or grab the peak here that we're going to turn into a first vertex. And we just right click on that, and then we go to mask and shape, and we can set it to the first vertex. Awesome. Now let's back up and take a look. So it is way better already. Now it looks like though that this little wheel well, it's kind of taking a little bit for it to transform, and so it doesn't look that great. So we can just kind of nudge it along a little bit. We're going to just come in a few frames, and we'll grab that wheel well, that vertex, and just pull it down. And this will speed up the animation so that it didn't do that weird little scallop in that shape. A lot better. Great. Now let's move on to these tires. These tires need to turn the pillars. We'll focus on the far left and right pillars first, and that would be rectangle 1. And if we open up that shape and grab that path and copy, and then we'll go to that tire, and the tire shape, that was, there we go, that is what actually started out as the handle. We'll open that up, and we have two paths here, and one was the inset path, and so we'll go ahead and grab path 1 and create a keyframe for the beginning of this time, and we'll go ahead and create that keyframe. And then we need to create, we'll pull in halfway through our animation here, and we'll paste that shape, and then we'll back up just to see how that transforms, and it looks great, so no problems there. Now we need to do the same thing for our back wheel. We can go ahead and add a keyframe for that back wheel, and that is this shape right here. And then we'll come halfway through, and we'll grab the path from rectangle 4 and copy, and then come up to our shape or for our back wheel, and we'll paste. Awesome. Looks good. And now we need to decide what to do for those middle columns. So let's grab the rectangle 2 and 3, and we're just going to copy. Then we're going to come up to our contents here, and we'll just paste them. So make sure you have content selected and paste. And then we can make some keyframes for the two shapes, for those two rectangles in the middle. So that will be rectangle 3 and 4. And what we're going to do is we're going to have the outer columns kind of morph into these inner columns. And that'll be really easy. But what would help us is if maybe we took this path and pasted it inside the other rectangle. So that would be rectangle, let's see, we have rectangle 2 and 3, I believe. They're all getting kind of a little messy. So at this point, we might want to go ahead and name this one the columns. And we'll open up rectangle 2, grab that path, copy, and then we'll just delete, and then open up columns and paste. So now we have rectangle 1 and 2, or path 1 and 2, and we have a fill that is controlling both of those. And so what we'll do is let's open up those paths, and we'll create keyframes right here in the middle. So right when those columns form, then we'll create keyframes for its brothers and sisters. And actually, let's go ahead and we'll push those to the end, because I actually want those to be at the end of this animation. And what we'll do is we'll paste these two shapes in place. So that would be, if we have this one, that we want to grab this column and we want to paste this column shape before this happens. So let's grab that column. That was this little shape right here. And we can actually, let's go ahead and hit U on the keyboard, and that will pull up all those keyframes. So we can pull up this path, and you can tell which path that you're actually grabbing if you select its keyframe. So that would be this one. So you look at that first vertex, then it is now a square. So that lets me know that I'm copying the right one. So we'll Control C, and then we'll go down to this path and Control V. And then the same will do for this one. So we can grab this path, I believe. Yes, Control C, and then we'll come down to this last path and Control V. And so what we should have is a nice little morph between those columns. Awesome. But the problem that we do have is that those columns are hanging out way before they're supposed to. So this is where that fill comes in, that's controlling both of those shapes. So let's go ahead and close this up and open it back up so that we can take a look at the columns folder that we have inside of these contents. We're getting a lot of folders in here now. And we can grab that fill, open that up, and we're going to go down to the opacity of that fill, and we're going to create a keyframe. And we will come up one more keyframe, or one more frame, and we're going to create that keyframe for that next frame. But let's go back to that previous frame, and we're going to turn the opacity to 0. So now what we have is, even though those shapes are there, they are actually, you can't see them because we've turned off their opacity. So we just want it to show up just as those other columns have shown themselves. And so we now have this car that the wheels turn into columns and kind of push the structure up. And then the columns just kind of look like they morph out of nowhere. So I think I'm pretty happy with that animation that we've created. And so in our next lesson, we'll be taking our capital structure, and we'll be continuing our story by turning it into our fork. In this lesson, we'll continue telling our story by animating our capital building. Let's take a look at what we have here. We have a lot going on inside our animations layer, but we do have this really cool animation, and we were able to create the illusion of these two columns splitting. And now it's time to turn this into our next shape, and that was our fork. And our layer really is getting pretty complicated, pretty complex. And what we can do is we can go ahead and we'll end this layer. So we can just grab the end and just pull it in to right where that marker is. If you hold Shift, it'll just kind of lock into place. And then we'll pick up with the real capital layer. And we can grab that layer and we can just nudge it up, or we can just grab and drag it up. And what we can do is just grab this end and hold Shift, and it'll just continue right where the other one left off. But you can see that we have a problem because they don't quite line up. But we can grab both these layers and hit P and take a look at our properties. It looks like our Y value has been nudged a little bit. We can just put in 360 for that bottom capital layer, and now they line up perfectly. Awesome. Now let's take a look at our fork layer here. If we open that up, we actually don't even have to have the visibility on if we have this shape path visibility turned on. And we can take a look and kind of decide this hierarchy that we're going to be abiding by. So we have rectangle 1 is the top one, 2 is the second, or actually 3 is somehow the second, and so on. And we have the larger shape. And so if we started with this bottom shape here, we'll go ahead and grab that path and copy. And then let's go to our capital and open up our contents. And we were going to start maybe with this far right column. That is number 4. And we'll need to add a keyframe for this path. since we've just started out with this shape, we need to go ahead and start our keyframing process. And we can just come through about halfway or so and paste that shape. And I think that it will work just fine. So as we go through and do that for the rest of these rectangles, then I think it'll turn out great. So remember, that is the top, and we can go ahead and rename this to larger shape for now, and that'll help us out. And let's move on to the next rectangle, and that is this one. And we'll go ahead and add a keyframe for that in the beginning of our animation. And then we'll scroll through here around that same time, and let's go grab that shape. So remember, that is, we want to grab this shape right here. There it is. Let's open that up, open up that path, and copy. And we'll come up and select that path and paste. And you probably have already figured this out, but just keeping your timeline indicator where it needs to be will really help you out, so you don't accidentally paste a keyframe where it doesn't go. I think that looks good. And now let's move on to the next one. That would be our rectangle 2. We'll open up that path, hit Shift to help it lock into the beginning of our animation, and we'll move down our timeline a little. And let's go get the next one. And that would be, would that be 4? No, we already have 4. What else do we have? Is it 2? 3, maybe it's 3. There it is. Okay, so let's take 3, open up that path, copy, come up to the top. And there is our nice little path there, and we'll just paste that right on in. So we're almost there. And we can now close that up just so we don't get confused. Open up rectangle 1 and open up that path. And let's create a keyframe, but remember to grab that indicator and put it where it needs to be. Then we'll just bring that down a little bit further. And let's go get our fork shape. So we've already done 3. And let's see, I believe that's 1. There it is. And let's open up that path and copy. And then come to our path and paste. Awesome. All right, now we just need to worry about the top. And that, remember, we call that a larger shape. We'll create our keyframe for that path. And then move down so we can make this animation last a little bit longer than the others. Then we'll grab that top, that shape to the right, and we're going to copy. And we might need to adjust this one once we paste it. We'll just see how it goes. Paste. Ooh, that is something else. Okay, so what can we do for this shape? In the beginning of that animation, the first vertex is here, and then when we take a look, then our first vertex is on this side. And maybe it would actually help us if we put that first vertex over here on the right. And we can just hold the space bar and we'll come over here. And let's see if we can right click and set as the first vertex. Actually, let's grab our pen tool. We'll hold Control and select it. Now we can right click on it. And we can go to Mask and Shape Path and set that as that first vertex. And now let's take a look at that shape. A lot better. It is so much better. Awesome. All right. So now we have a nice transition between the pillars here. What we might do is maybe we should, let's go ahead and select this layer, and we'll just hit U on the keyboard, and that will pull up all our keyframes. And maybe we can kind of stagger some of these just so that they animate in their own little order. And that will kind of help kind of help out. I think that looks nice. It's almost like they're kind of taking turns. Great. All right, so it looks like the last one to do is the phone. And so in our next lesson, we'll be continuing our story and finalizing our story by animating our phone. In this lesson, we'll continue telling our story by animating our fork. So in our last lesson, we threw our fork together here and coming from our Capitol building. But what I noticed is that our tongs don't actually touch the shape, which when we built the fork, these tongs were a little bit longer. And that's because we transformed those shapes. And when we copied the paths, it didn't carry over those shape transformations. And that's fine, because now all we can do, all we need to do is we'll just line up our keyframes just to make it all one fluid motion here. And we're just going to grab all of these, make sure I'm grabbing the right ones. And we're going to just transform we're just going to grab the vertices and move them over. So hold Control and just drag those over. And then we can hold Control again if we want to make those a little bit longer. And then we can just take our keyframes and move them back to where they were. No big deal. Let's take a look at that. Awesome. All right. And now we can focus on turning our fork into a smartphone. So we'll just come down and we're going to add keyframes to all of our paths here, because we're going to use all of them. And we're going to focus on creating the body, and then a screen, and then the 3 buttons. So which of these is the body? That is, let's see, if we click this, then that is, actually let's kind of get off of there. Okay, so that I believe is the body right there. So that is the first path we have. And let's take our indicator, move it down just a little so we'll know where to paste. And let's get our smartphone. Where is our smartphone? There it is. Let's go ahead and close up some of these others so we don't get distracted. And our smartphone has a body, and it has these ellipses and a screen. So let's open up the body and grab the path. So when we open up that body, you can see there's no path to grab. That's because it's still a rounded rectangle and not a Bezier path. So let's right click on that, convert to Bezier. And now we can copy that path. Copy, Control C. And now let's go to that first path in our fork / capital layer and paste. Then we can back up and take a look at that animation. And it's looking crazy. And why is that? Well, it looks like our path is wanting to take a little flip. So what can we do here? Let's take we have our pen tool. Let's double click on one of these vertices. And I want you to look over here in our info palette. So when I click and drag, you can see our height over there is changing. If I hold Control, then I'm moving the top and the bottom. And I just want to flip this. And so you can see over there that it's saying 99.1%. I want to keep that. I want to make that about 100%. So 100.6, I can live with that. And now let's take a look at our animation. Smooth. So when you see something that is trying to twist like that, sometimes all you got to do is flip that path and you'll be okay. Awesome. All right, now let's move on to some of these others. So maybe either the bottom or the top. Maybe the top should be the screen. So that would be this path right here. And that one should probably form about just shortly after the body does, or yeah, the body of the phone. So we'll go down and grab the screen. Let's open that up. And again, it is a rounded rectangle. So let's convert to Bezier. And we're going to grab, there it is. Let's grab that path, copy, come up, and we're going to go to our path and paste. Awesome. And then we're going to go down and get our buttons. But before we do that, let's go ahead and knock away this shape. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to have to add, so let's close up that capital and open it up and get that shape, or get our contents, and we're going to add a merge paths, just like we had for our handle and for our smartphone. So let's add a merge paths to that whole deal there. But we need to determine what the merge paths is going to be. So right now it's set to add. Let's see what happens when we change that. So let's maybe scroll up a little bit. And how about if it is merge? Awesome. Merge was going to be awesome. Okay, so that is knocking away that shape, but I hope that it doesn't mess with our other animation. Nope, it didn't. So that is great. But look at that screen. That is not right. That screen is horrible. So I'm going to hit U on the keyboard. That'll pull up all my keyframes here. Make sure that I don't actually mess anything up. And what I want to do is I want to change this to my first vertex, because it looks like it'd just be a little bit better if it was able to move down instead of having to rotate everything. So what we can do is get our pen tool. We'll make a wild selection over here first, and then we can kind of select what we want. So let's select that vertex and right click, and it's going out of frame. So let's go to over here. So we can go to layer, mask and shape path, and we're going to set our first vertex. Now, awesome. That is way better. Okay, now let's move on to our buttons. So let's see here. I guess in no particular order. I guess maybe this one could be the far right one. This one could be, or maybe that one's the far right one. Okay, and so we'll kind of move down just a little, and that will be our far right button. And when we come down to our smartphone, we have some ellipses down here, and we have ellipse path. But again, the ellipse isn't a true path. So let's right click on that and convert it to a Bezier path. Now we can take that path and select and copy. And now we can go up to our layer that we're going to use, and we'll paste, Control V. But it pasted it way over here. No big deal. Double click. It looks like that we probably did the same thing. And so we probably transformed it, and it's not copying those transform properties. But I can live with that, because now I can just copy that path, Control C, and I can move down to my other layer, Control V, and just nudge it over. Let's see how that works. Awesome. And we need one from the middle. So let's go ahead and Control V and nudge it over. But what we'll do is we'll just enlarge that center button just a little. No big deal. Double click on it and zoom in just so we can see. Enlarge it just a little and give it a couple of nudges here. Awesome. I think that looks great. Now we can just hit escape to get out of that transform mode, and we can just see what we have. So now that we have it transform into a smartphone, looks good. Then we can just hit 0 on our numeric keyboard, and that will allow us to roll through our animations. So we're able to go from our car, or from our pump, rolls right into a car, and to our columns of our capital and our fork, and then right into a smartphone. Looks great. We don't have anything crazy going on that is looks like too automated. So everything looks great. So that brings us to the end of this lesson of creating our little shape story. In our next lesson, we're going to be working with shapes that we've pulled in from other programs. In this lesson, we'll be working with shape layers that we've imported from other programs. So let's go ahead and make a new composition. And 1280 by 720 is good. 24 frames a second and 6 seconds will be great. And then for our background color, let's pick something a little better than that. We can do that. Maybe blue, I don't know. How about this? This is a nice blue. Cyan is what it's calling it. That's fine, and we'll hit OK. And then let's grab, let's pull in our vector layer. So let's double click on our project. In our reference files, we have this shape guy, and it's just an Illustrator file, and we can pull it in as footage. That's fine. Let's import. And then let's grab our shape guy and just drag him down to our layers panel. So now we have our shape guy just hanging out, and he's not a true shape layer. So what we can do is we can go to layer, and we're going to we're going to create shapes from the vector layer. And so After Effects turned off our shape guy vector layer, which we can now just delete, and it gave us all these little shapes. And so if you open up contents, you can see we have, looks like 39 groups of these little vector groups. So what we can do is we can create we'll go to contents, and we're going to make a empty group, which we'll call all of them, and then we'll grab all of them, and then we can just put them inside that empty group. Awesome. That is way more manageable. So now we have all of our groups inside that one layer, but we can still select different layers if we'd like, or different groups, and we can change them. So I could grab his coffee cup. I can turn it to red if I wanted to do that. Looks good to me. Awesome. All right, now let's add something to this group. How about let's add a stroke. So you can see that when I added the stroke that, the stroke isn't necessarily messing with any of these. It's just kind of this nice cohesive relationship. And so if I took that stroke and I put it before that group, you can see that stacking order is very important. So let's add something else though. Let's add a repeater. When we add a repeater, then that effect is actually affecting everything. Even though it's inside this group, since its order has been put in that at the bottom, then you can see what it affects. And so if we put this repeater and drag it down, you can see the crazy effects it has. But I want it to affect the whole group. So we'll put it down here below the stroke. Awesome. Now let's take a look at what this repeater is doing. Right now it's set to 3 copies, but I think we can do better than that. We can actually bring these way up. How about 11 copies? And then for our offset, the offset is how it's offsetting all these copies. So if I change that, you can see what's happening. It's offsetting those copies in space. And I think -5 is going to work for what we're doing. And then we have this composite. So right now it's compositing that elbow kind of above or below. So you can see how it's compositing all those different copies. And then let's take a look at these different transform properties. So this is only transforming the repeater. So the layer is sitting right where it is, but I can still change the position. And you can see it's changing the position in a different way than probably what you thought it was going to. It's actually changing the position of the repeater itself. So the X value is changing, and then I can actually change the Y value. And so it kind of gives me a little bit of depth if I needed that. And then we also have a scale. So the scale is changing how large the repetition is. So if I brought that up to, let's say, 115% or so, which I almost had there for a second. Okay, 114 I guess will be good enough. Then I'll change his position. I just want him to kind of be kind of staggered in space. And so if I change his position to 28, and then I changed his Y position to something like 1-ish, then now it's like he's standing in line. And that looks great. And then let's take a look at adding another repeater. So if I just kind of close that up just for now, and maybe we'll call this vertical while we're at it so we don't get them confused. because it is kind of like in a vertical line, let's add another repeater. So I'm going to actually close up this group also because it's kind of a lot. And now we'll add a repeater and we'll call it horizontal. And I'm just hitting enter on my keyboard, and that allows me to rename. But it isn't working how I want it to. I want them to really be making some copies and going off into vertical space. But it looks like it's kind of like doing this weird roundabout thing. But watch what happens if I take my stacking order. So I'm going to grab that horizontal and I'm going to put it above the vertical. And so now it actually kind of straightened them out. And so I have 52 copies. Let's make that a little less than that. We don't really need 52. How about like 19 or so? But for my offset, I want them to go more left. And so let's change that to a negative number. So when we start to drag our negative number, then now we have kind of dragged him off our stage. So let's make it more like -6. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, I can work with that. And now let's take a look at some of our other properties. So when we open up our transform, then we have the position. And so for position, let's move him around a little bit. So it's starting to look a little bit better. He's starting to kind of space it out a little bit, maybe a little too much. How about like 125? Let's see what that looks like. Okay, that looks good, like a nice little group of folks out there. And then what else do we have? It looks pretty good. It's just kind of hard to see this great big group. So what would happen if we made this a 3D object? So in my mind, it looks 3D, right? But let's take and make a new camera. Oops. So layer, new camera, and I think all these settings look good. We'll hit OK. And let's go ahead and grab our unified camera tool. And this will just help us pan around. So I just want to click and drag and just scrub, and we're just dragging down. I just want to see what this looks like from above. Oh, it looks like that from above. So let's go ahead and Control Z. So that just tells us that this, even though this looks like 3D, it's really just a flat layer. This is like an illusion. But how can we get an effect where we're actually able to see this like we're in 3D? Well, actually, it's not that hard. So let's go ahead and hit P for our camera, and that opens up our position. And what we're going to do is we're going to go down to one of our repeaters. We're going to open up the vertical, and we're going to look at our anchor point here. And we're going to hold Alt and click that keyframe, and that stopwatch actually. And so we're going to write a little expression. We're going to hit the bracket next to the P. We're going to hit comma, and we're going to end the bracket, so the bracket next to that. And then we're going to come down inside, and right before that comma, we're going to grab our pick whip. And what we're doing right now is we're saying that we want to change the anchor point of this little repeater to give us a nice little effect, because we want to link it to the camera. So when I click that X value, then I'm going to come over and get inside my expression again. It's going to give us some errors because we haven't finished writing our expression. But now we're going to go, making sure that we're inside that expression, and we're going to grab the pick whip, and now we're going to select the Y value. And so once you let go, then now your value should be, or your expression should be correct, and you shouldn't have any errors. You can tell because this will have a little exclamation. And so what it did was it kind of zoomed in a little bit, and that's fine. Let's just zoom out with our camera manually. So in our Z value, it's -17,7777 to the 777. Let's just put -3000. That'll back us up a little bit. Awesome. And then let's go ahead and let's add a keyframe here in the middle for our position. And then let's go to the beginning of our timeline. We'll just change our X and Y values. All I want is for my X value, let's just change that to like 150 or so. And then for my Y value, let's change that to, let's just raise it a little bit to actually -400. So what that'll do is it'll just put the camera up and over a little bit. And let's come down to the end, and we'll change our values again to, it'll now be 1500 because we want it to be swung way over. And then we're going to change our Y value to just, how about -300? That'll just kind of raise it up. And so now if you hit your RAM preview, then we have this nice little animation. It's showing, really setting off all of our repeated dudes here. And so we now can see this army of coffee holding fellas. And so, you know, all this is though is just a 2D layer, and we've just happened to add an expression that allows us to just kind of flip through and see how awesome this repeater is. And so just kind of keep in mind things like your stacking order whenever you're using a repeater on top of a repeater, because otherwise you got that weird little arc thing, which if that's what you want, if you want that weird arc, then that's fine too. And so let's go ahead and take a look at our RAM preview that we have. It's wrapping up, rendering that out. And so we have this little camera, do a little flyby of our dudes, kind of drop down and then just kind of move over to the right. And so now we have all these dudes that we made with a 2D layer. So in our next lesson, we're going to be creating particles with shapes. In this lesson, we'll be creating a particle-like effect with our shapes. We have a new project open. Let's go ahead and make a new composition. And that's 1280 by 720, and the frame rate is 24. And the duration, let's just use about 6 seconds. And our background color is black because we're going to be creating like a space-like effect. And you know, the universe doesn't have much in it except for all the planets and stuff. All right, let's go ahead and let's make some text for our composition. Let's get our text tool, and let's take a look at what we have for our character. Arial black looks good. 180 is the size that we'll use. And let's make sure that we have a centered text. And let's just put this right here in the middle. And we're going to create, how about a comet? Let's go ahead and do all caps. More to work with there. And then if you hit enter on your numeric keyboard, that'll get out of that editing mode. But let's align this with our comp. So we're aligning it to our composition, centering it, and vertical and horizontal. Looks good. And what we want to do though is we want to make sure that our text is a shape layer. So we can go to layer, and we want to create shapes from text. Awesome. And so this does save our text, but if we wanted to make any edits or anything like that, we'd have to come back to this layer. And I'll show you later where we could paste our new shapes if we needed to do that. So let's go ahead and open up our outlines and look at our contents. We have all these different layers here, but let's open them up and see what we need to do. So we have some strokes and fills that we need to get rid of because we don't need them. So we'll go ahead and delete those. We probably could have just, we could probably just select them all of our contents and go to fill, say no fill, and hit OK. Okay, I think that'll work. Awesome. Okay, so we have COMET. Great. Let's go ahead and we're going to make a duplicate of this layer. So just select a layer, not the contents on the inside, and Control D. And this will be, we'll rename this. You can hit enter on your keyboard to rename it. And we'll call this the other one. We'll hide it for now. And let's go back to our outlines. Let's go to our contents here. And let's make a new group. In this group, we will call it all of our letters. And we can put all these inside just to kind of manage this space that we have down here. So now we have everything in our layers folder. And let's add some properties. So we don't have anything now because we turned them off. And so let's go ahead and add a stroke. And this stroke will make very special. So let's take this stroke and drag it to the outside just so that we have it on the outside of all these. Put it below the letters though. There we go. And let's open up our stroke properties. And let's change the color first off to a nice crazy green. I think that looks good. And then for our opacity, we can probably bring that down a little bit. How about 50%? And then our stroke width, we want to give it just a little bit of width for our stroke. About 19. Looks like a lot right now, but it'll look better in a second. And then for our dashes. Okay, so we have some dashes down here, but you can't actually see them. That's because we need to hit this little plus, and that will give us some dashes. And that looks kind of cool actually, but that's not what we need right now. And we want to go to our line cap and change that from but to round. And now you're saying, well, now you can't even see it. Well, let's go down to our dash, change that to 0. And then for our gap, we don't have one. So we need to hit this plus one more time and add a gap to this. So now you can see something cool happening. And now it no longer even looks like our letters when you really space out that gap. But it's a little much, so we'll bring that back down to like 40 or so. Awesome. All right, so now we have some cool little like particles that kind of looks like particles. Then let's go ahead and we'll add a repeater. So now we can go and come up here and let's add a repeater. And when we do that, then it kind of did like our dudes did earlier, and it just kind of puts them off to the side. So let's go ahead and let's change however many copies we have. So for our repeater, we'll add, how about 60 copies? It sounds like a lot, doesn't it? But we're going to like push them out into space because this will be like a comet trail. So what we need to do is we need to adjust the position of our copies. So let's go ahead and take a look at let's open up our transform properties for that repeater. All right, it looks like what we need to do is adjust our position a little bit because we want this to kind of go off into space. So what we're going to do is we're going to just decrease that X value for the position. And you can already see it's doing some cool stuff right off the bat. Now let's change our Y value, see if we can get something. How about, nope. How about having it come like out from over here? So let's change it just a little bit. That's almost what I want. Maybe it's push this over a little bit. Okay, well we're getting there. Let's adjust our scale and see if we can get what we want. So I do know though, I want to kind of unconstrain my proportions for my scale because I want it to adjust these values independently and get something cool like this. Very cool. All right, so let's maybe decrease our scale a little bit and then let's change this scale. Wow. Let's decrease this one to, I don't know, just a little bit. Let's decrease this one a little bit more. And then maybe let's adjust our position a little bit. There we go. Now it's kind of like getting off of our area a little bit better. And then now let's take a look at some rotation and see if we can get some cool rotation. So when I start to adjust this rotation, man, I get some cool stuff going on. And so what I want is for it to kind of like, I want to have it come in and like loop around, something like that. So maybe not so many rotations. And then for my scale, let's see here. Whoa. How about 96 or so? Maybe I need to adjust that position to where it's just coming out of view. There we go. I think that's starting to look pretty good. And so I think that for our effect though, it looks like I could probably adjust these just a little bit more, and I could probably tweak on these forever actually until I got exactly what I wanted. But really it looks pretty good. I just wanted to kind of flip once or twice. Yeah, something like that. It looks awesome. Okay, so now that we have our first repeater all set up, and actually our only repeater, then what we're going to do is we're going to stop here and save this out. And in our next lesson, we're going to finish up this cool effect. In this lesson, we're going to polish off our particle effect on our comet. So we have our comet pretty much set up. let's go ahead and take a look at our properties for our contents in our repeater. So when we open up that repeater, then we have all these transform properties, but we didn't adjust some of these down here. So let's take a look at our anchor point. So if we took the anchor point, the X value, and just drug this over a little bit, then we can get a little bit more of an arc here in our loop. So let's take this to about -80 or so. Then let's take our Y value, and we want to just bring this down because we want to open this up a little. Awesome. But now I want to go ahead and change my position, because now that I've adjusted that, I want to go ahead and bring that back up. There we go. And what about my rotation? There's a lot of rotation, so we'll go ahead and change that just a little bit. Okay, I think that looks good. All right, we'll leave it alone. We could probably mess with that forever. And if you want to mess with yours and adjust it, I mean, that's awesome, because this is all kind of like an artistic interpretation anyway. So just whatever you think looks good for now. And then let's go ahead and we're going to keyframe our offset. So let's come in and let's come to about the 4-second mark, and we're going to add a keyframe for our offset, and let's come down to the 0 mark. And let's go ahead and take a look at our offset when we start to decrease that or increase that number. So what we want is for it to kind of show up like this. So we'll go ahead and bring that back to 60. And so now when we scrub through, we have it showing up. Awesome. And then for our copies. So for our copies, we want to go ahead and start to taper those off. And so we'll come to about a little after the 3-second mark, and we're going to add a keyframe. Or actually, let's go and pull it back to the 3-second mark. And then we want it to kind of stop right here at about 9 or so, about 9 copies. And then we're going to allow it to kind of like taper off back to 0. Let's see what that looks like. There we go. Looking awesome. Okay, and so before we go any further, let's go ahead and let's copy our repeater. So let's actually take our indicator back to 0, and we'll copy the repeater, Control-C, and then we're going to go up to our other layer, and we're going to open up those contents, and we're going to paste that effect right on into the contents. And so now when we open up our contents here, then we have our repeater, and it's coming through. Awesome. But we don't have anything for us to be able to see these contents. Let's add a fill. Or should we add a stroke? Let's go ahead and add a fill. And let's make that fill, how about white? Awesome. But one thing about our repeater is that we actually don't need all these copies. And so what we'll do is we're going to turn off those keyframes, and we're going to change those copies to 1 copy. And so now when it comes through, our comment is just kind of leading the way. Awesome. That's exactly what we wanted to do. But now let's take a look at why this is on a separate layer, because we could have done this all in the same layer. So let's go ahead and we're going to grab our outlines, and we're going to go ahead and add an effect. So let's go ahead and add a blur. So we can type in blur and look for that. Let's see, where do we have? Let's go ahead and grab the Gaussian blur and add a little bit of that. Just kind of blur out those particles a little. And so now when you back up, you can get a really nice effect because it's kind of blurring out that comment. But you know what? Let's add a little bit of a glow to our other one. So see, other one. Now you know why I called it other one. So how about, let's see if we have anything nice, a nice glow for the other one. We can double click on that. And then let's take a look. Let's see. For our color, how about a nice green? So we can sample that. And let's hit OK. And what we need to do though is let's go ahead and let's bring up our threshold, our radius a little bit. maybe not our threshold. And then let's go ahead and let's make it normal. And for the glow colors, let's make it A and B. And for this other color, we can pick another nice glow. And then let's see, what is our intensity? We can increase that just a little bit. I think that looks nice. Awesome. I think that looks great. All right. Let's go through here. So maybe we don't want that glow all the way through. So what we'll do is let's add some keyframes for these values. So maybe the radius and intensity, all those. And then we want that glow to kind of go away. We can bring those down. There we go. Nice, very nice. Okay, but one thing that we would like is, so when that comment ends, we want it to kind of go have a little pulse there at the end. So what we'll do is right as it hits right there, let's open up our contents, and we're going to give this just a little bit of an offset, not the offset around the repeater. We're going to add an offset for our contents. So let's add a offset paths, and let's take a look at our properties here. So the amount is already set to 10, but we don't want it set to 10. We want it set to 0 for now. And we'll add a keyframe. But we want it to increase a lot right in here. So we'll go ahead and increase that, because as it pulses, we want it to kind of explode. So as it hits, to just kind of fade out. Very nice. That looks great. Okay, so now we have this really nice comment coming in, and as it hits, it kind of pulses and lets that effect fade out. Heck, we might even go and get our opacity, and let's go ahead and keyframe that as well. So we'll make this really a nice little fade right here. So just as it's disappearing, maybe we'll make that 0%, and then we'll back up and increase our opacity back to 100%. Okay, so this is like right when it's showing up. Maybe it's a little extreme. Okay, so let's change this. It's not really the effect that I'm looking for. Let's drag this out a little bit. There we go. I think that looks good. All right, so now that we have our comment showing up, nice little particle looking effect, then in our next lesson, we're going to go ahead and finish this up by making a nice little backdrop. So a nice little universe for our comet. In this lesson, we're going to be creating the entire universe with shape layers. All right, so we have our comet layer that comes through and does this awesome thing at the end. That's pretty awesome. And now we need to just kind of create its world that it lives in, which is the universe. So we'll go ahead and it's going to hide these, but actually let's go ahead and duplicate our outlines layer, and we'll just call this our universe. We'll put this back behind, and let's go ahead and turn off the visibility of these other layers so that they don't bother us. And now let's open up our universe layer and look at our contents. Actually, you know what? Let's delete our effects. We don't need those. And then let's take a look at our contents. We also don't need the offset paths. And we'll take a look at our stroke. So our stroke color is now set to green. Let's make this like that universal, like purplish color. That looks good. And then for our width, let's go ahead and make this like a 4 or so, maybe 5. Something a little easier to see. Okay, we'll roll with 6 for now and see what happens. And then let's open up our repeater. So our repeater has a keyframe going on. So we'll go ahead and turn off those keyframes, and then we're going to adjust some of these values for the transform. And for the let's go ahead and give the values for the copies and for the offset. We want to make sure we have a lot of copies. And so how about like 40 copies or so. Does that work? And then for our offset, I don't know that we need a whole lot of offset. Maybe like negative 15, 18, something like that. We'll just roll with negative 17. I just want to have a nice little arc of universe here. But we're going to transform some of these other properties like our anchor point and our transform and stuff like that. So for our anchor point, let's really take this and open up our universe. This is a universe. So how about like negative 400 and something. And then for our y value, we'll just put this at like a little bit more positive. So like 100 and something, like 115 to 20, somewhere in there. So you can see that we're getting a nice even pattern, except it is kind of disappearing out into space. And so we need to go to our scale. We'll just change these to 100 and 100. We want to keep this nice and even. So we want to keep it spread out, but you know, nice and even. So then for our position, let's go ahead and bring this to like, really it could be 0, but how about like 2 or so. And then for the Y position, what we want to do is we want to just kind of close up that hole that we had. Oh, actually we can close it up like that. So just something like that. All right. And then for our rotation, let's take a look at that. So rotation will really help us out. So what we want to do is like kind of fan this out to where we're able to kind of fill in any kind of universal gaps. You see what I did there? Universal gaps. Oh, that looked great there for a second. Maybe I could just nudge this value. Okay, I think that might work. All right, now what we can do is we can just grab our universe and just kind of move it where we want it. Awesome. I think that looks pretty good. Now let's go back to our stroke and let's go ahead and adjust our dashes gap. So let's open up our dashes, and our gap right now is set to 40. And if we can actually take and adjust, then we can really get whatever we want. And you can see what it really looks like when we pull this in. So let's go ahead and increase this to like, how about like in the 60s or so. It's like there's a magic number really for this one. So like when you adjust that value, you'll hit a point where it just looks right. So you're not like seeing shapes. You're actually, it'll start to look like the stars. So how about 63, 64? Okay, so we'll roll with 64. So now this looks awesome. Little bitty stars out there. And we're going to do a little something where we're going to add a cross blur. So you can see this little cross blur down here. Watch what happens. Double click on cross blur and we go to effects and controls. Actually, we need to make sure we have that layer selected. There we go. Now we can double click on cross blur and we have an X and a Y. And when we start to increase them, then when you zoom in, you can see that we have an X and a Y blur. And it looks like we need to increase our opacity. What's going on here? T. Okay, our opacity is only set to 78%. We need to get rid of that business. Bring this back up to 100%. And then maybe a little bit less of the blur there. That looks pretty good. Awesome. And now we'll duplicate this layer, Control D. And these will be the white stars that are on top of the universe. So you can go ahead and hit Enter on your keyboard, and this will be our stars. And so you probably imagined already that we need to go in and grab that stroke color, and we're going to change that stroke to white. But we need to decrease some things. So let's go ahead and we'll be increasing our dashes. So that is the gap, I should say, between the dashes. That'll give us less stars, but let's go ahead and let's bump up the stroke width just a little, and maybe even less stars. So we'll decrease the gap. Awesome. So like that gap is 621, so pretty sparse back there. So that is an awesome, awesome universe that we live in. And what we'll do is we'll go to the beginning of our timeline and we'll click on Stars and Universe and we'll hit P on the keyboard and add a keyframe. Then we're going to go all the way to the end and we're just going to nudge our universe to the left just ever so slightly. And so now when we go back through, the universe should just barely move over time, right? Awesome. So now we can turn back on our comet and our comet outlines. And we'll go ahead and we'll get a RAM preview of this. Awesome. So now we have our comet flying in our universe in the background, all created with just some shapes, and we're able to add just a few effects here and there to get this awesome effect. And so that brings us to the end of this lesson and the end of this course. So now you know the basics of how shapes work with each other. You know, just a few things like going in and you're adding little effects to the shapes. You're actually adding its properties in, and you're able to see how it is that you can take the path of a shape and you're able to morph it into another shape, and you're able to either keep these all on separate layers or keep it all in one layer if you need to add an effect to it. And you're able to also take a shape from, let's say, another program, and you're able to convert it, and you're able to get a shape layer from that vector layer. And you also know how to take a text layer, and you're able to convert that into a shape layer. And you can see what we did with just some text that had been outlined. We're able to get some really cool effects. So thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.